Well, listen, I'm super excited to have Ben Bradley on the show today. Ben, I'll let you give your title, but I think it's Enterprise Sales Team Lead, Automattic?
That's right.
Okay.
And Automattic lets you pick your own title. So
nice.
Technically, I am a team lead. I lead the enterprise sales team. We focus on our largest and most strategic customers. It's at this point a team of 6 AEs, but growing pretty rapidly. My official title internally, I think, was growth engineer.
Nice.
And I narrowly avoided choosing Supreme Allied Commander for myself.
Nice. Right on.
Automattic lets you pick your own title. That is accurate.
That's great. Well, what an awesome company. I mean, I got to share with you a little bit about my WordPress history and then we'll dig into. I'm really curious how you landed there. But just a little bit of backdrop.
Sure.
I started messing around on the web. I don't know, 2001, I guess, was when I started to get my first intro into the web. WordPress was just starting to get big. My buddy, who, I don't know if you know Jeremy Chrysler or not.
I've heard the name, but have not met him.
Good friend of mine. Yeah. I grew up with him. He started a little website back in the day called Fogblog.
Oh, yes. I'm Fogblog reader from way back when.
Yeah, I don't know if it's even still around or not. But
I lost track of it when I think I had kids. But I thought it moved to another platform and then sort of wasn't the same community. But
I think so. I think he may have a Twitter account now.
Shout out to old school Fogblog.
Yeah.
I definitely read that in the 2000s.
He's such a good dude.
Yeah.
Good friend of mine. We were neighbors in Florida for a couple of years, and when he built the site back in circa 2001 or 2, I was like, dude, you're not a coder. How did you do that? And he's like, I made it on this thing called WordPress. And I just fell in love with it. I started tinkering around with WordPress, and this was back when I was trying to build websites with Dreamweaver and just trying to slap together content. It was so freaking hard.
Yep.
And WordPress was just amazing. It was like plug and play. But then, fast forward, I do have to say, fast forward to today, I have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with WordPress because the community grew so fast. I think I read somewhere that powers 40-50% of the web. Yep. It got really complicated. There are some things that I absolutely love about WordPress.
Yep.
But there are some things that I struggle with as well.
Of course.
But I'm really, really pumped to see the changes maybe in the last 2 years.
Yep.
I was fortunate enough to see Matt Mullenweg speak at SaaStr 2 years ago, and I was just blown away.
Oh yeah, Matt's amazing.
He is amazing. I got a retweet from him, which was my claim to fame. So
there you go.
Yeah,
Photo Matt. At Photo Matt. Honestly, frame that.
I should sell it as an NFT. Maybe I'll do that. So what is your background and how did you land at WordPress?
So my background. Native Kansan, born in Hutchinson, went to high school in Wichita, went to school on the East Coast, college in the East Coast, Dartmouth College.
When did you get out of school at Hutch?
We moved from Hutch in 89. I was born in 83.
Okay.
So
you graduated 2000-ish?
Yeah, 2001.
Okay.
Wichita East High School.
Got it.
But basically all primary school and high school was in Wichita. Went out east for college. From there, went to DC, spent 1 year as a paralegal, decided I didn't want to be a lawyer. Although my father's a lawyer, I love lawyers. Lawyers are great people. Shout out to lawyers. Some of my best friends.
Our whole audience is lawyers.
some of my best friends are lawyers. But decided I didn't want to be a lawyer. Then the question was, what was I going to do? So my favorite magazine growing up was The Atlantic. It was then known The Atlantic Monthly. Unbeknownst to me, so The Atlantic was founded in Boston by a group of Boston Brahmins, fancy rich people, men, given it was the 1800s. It was known even when I was in college in New England as a Boston institution. What happened my senior year of college when I was busy doing other things was that David Bradley, who an entrepreneur who started the advisory board company and corporate executive board company, CEB was acquired by Gartner and now goes by Gartner, or CEB acquired Gartner and adopted the Gartner brand.
Okay.
One of the two.
Okay.
Big DC entrepreneur had bought the Atlantic and moved it to DC. So I just finished paralegaling, and my favorite magazine I discovered was located in the city in which I was living, and I was like, I'll do anything to work there. And I did do anything. I think I applied to 4 different jobs and got rejected from 3 of them. And then the 4th one was a research analyst on David Bradley's staff, where he wanted me to study the internet. And my job was essentially to explain the internet to David, who's a very, very smart and talented entrepreneur, but who didn't have the time to read blogs all day. And I, in 2006, did. And so I explained the internet to him and some of the executives at Atlantic Media Company, one of whom was the editor of The Atlantic, who had a website that was only publishing magazine articles every month, wasn't doing any sort of anything that theatlantic.com does now. So at the end of one of my research projects, it was asked to me, hey, would you want to help the editor of The Atlantic out on theatlantic.com? And I was like, yeah. Wow. I mean, that is literally my dream. Yeah. Very, very long stories in this section of my resume. That's
good. That's where the gold is, man.
Well, but, I helped launch Andrew Sullivan's blog on theatlantic.com. But the next series of blogs I helped launch were Jim Fallows, who's a famous staff writer, national correspondent for The Atlantic, Ross Douthat, who's now an opinion columnist for The Time, Ta-Nehisi Coates, who is, world famous, and Megan McArdle, who's a columnist at the Washington Post.
Wait, Megan McArdle, is she the one that does the Constitutional podcast and the?
She might be. I don't know. I've sort of lost track of Megan closely, but she does. I hear her on Left, Right, and Center frequently. It's a KQAD podcast. But, she's really smart. She's a great writer. Still lives in DC, as far as I know, but. Suffice to say, I launched a series of blogs on theatlantic.com, and my next project was to essentially product manage a website that was new and growing and had all these new appendages. And I'm 24. I've never done digital product management or any sort of like at-scale web development. And I've got some engineers. I've got a whole lot of editors. I've got a lot of really talented writers, and I got to deliver on keeping pace with sites and systems
for a big media publishing company.
A big brand at the time. The online presence. I think when I took over, we were getting 400,000 uniques in a given month.
I mean, that's not something to sneeze at.
And now I think they're probably, I don't know. This is off the top of my head. I would guess in the tens of millions, if not the hundreds of millions, uniques in a given month. And so it was quite the trial by fire. I spent 2.5 years there, thinking about how to schlep content from point A to point B and how to support these amazing writers, these amazing journalists in getting their content online and really learning on the job in the best possible way. Long story short, it was a grind, and I was blessed to be in that job. Ended up taking a different job where I did live events content for the live events division of The Atlantic, and then wanted to get engaged and get married. So decided to move to the nonprofit sector.
And before we make that jump, what systems were they using at The Atlantic?
Oh, yeah. So The Atlantic was on a custom Perl CMS that was a very bespoke thing. It's very common actually to see custom CMSs in that type of context. Because it turns out it's very easy to build a CMS. It's very hard to maintain one.
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
And there's
learn that the hard way.
Yeah, and I think like that's exactly it. You either have experienced that or you haven't. Yeah. And in that situation, getting away from, or at least limiting the scope for that custom Perl CMS was like a top priority. We used movable type for all the blogs, which was a worthy competitor to WordPress in that era. And this plays into sort of why I'm at VIP and what the WordPress story is. But I was involved enough in sort of looking at new frameworks, looking at the new hotness to ask my engineers about WordPress at the time. And the knock on WordPress at the time was it's fantastic. It's got a great UI. It's growing like crazy, but it's not really enterprise ready. And so we stuck with movable type. Hilarious in retrospect, given sort of where things went. But suffice to say, WordPress was on the table there. And obviously there still are tons of web content management frameworks.
It's funny. I hear that same comparable a lot right now, or I look back on that, hearing that a lot around Shopify right now.
Yep.
You know, 5 years ago, it was like, oh, you're going to use Shopify?
Right.
We got to have Magento. We got to control the database, like all these other stuff. And now it's like, if you want to start an e-commerce brand, Shopify is the way to go, or WooCommerce, of course.
Yeah, of course. Well, and I'm not. Obviously, I work for WordPress. I believe in the WordPress community and ecosystem, but Shopify is an excellent platform.
Yeah.
They're an excellent product, and I think what you see in software, like software generally, is that the size of the ecosystem, the size of the liquidity of the solutions in an ecosystem really determine a given customer's success or failure.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
And I think that's not to say, WordPress is great for all use cases, although it certainly can be used in a lot of different use cases. I think it's, I would never talk down Shopify. What they've done is really incredible, and it's a really powerful platform.
Yeah, I would agree. It's funny. We as an agency that is in the problem solving business for clients, a lot of clients that we work with are e-commerce brands.
Totally.
And we get the question a lot, should we use Shopify? Should we use WooCommerce or BigCommerce or some other thing? And one of the things we hear a lot is we hear at the beginning of these analyses, a lot of customers who are already using WordPress, trying to decide, do we go with Shopify? This is my opinion and my opinion only. I love WooCommerce as well. I think it's a great platform. To me, unless there's some really interesting business case where you need to make the switch. If you have an audience and your publishing system already exists on WordPress, your content's already there, you'd have to have a really good reason to not use WooCommerce.
Yep. And we would certainly agree with that presence. You actually see it at the top of our new website, wpvip.com.
Yeah.
New as of today, new as of the time I'm speaking. Content is growth, right?
Yeah, for sure.
What we're seeing in the enterprise customers that we work with is all of them, major high-scale publishers, high-security marketers in the Fortune 500, Fortune 100. They all want to produce more content.
Yeah.
They all want to have a really great content interface for getting content out the door. And the strength of WordPress, the history of WordPress is essentially being a great content management system when it comes to creating content, managing content, distributing content. I would put WordPress up there with any interface out there. And so to your point, if that's working for you, and we know how integral content is to selling, to commerce online, right? Content converts, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Answer Media does a lot of this work.
100%. Yeah.
And so if that content engine is working for you, WooCommerce is a plug-in for WordPress that marries commerce and content in the same place.
Yep.
And that's not to say Shopify is not a great tool for certain people, or there might be a reason for you not to use WooCommerce. But for our customers, and especially the customers who we work with and the enterprise, we're seeing a lot of inbound interest in WooCommerce because they really want to marry. They want to have one screen, one pane of glass where their content marketers, the people managing their commerce strategies, have something that they can do and do it in the same place.
I think it's a massive trend. I mean, there's this guy that I've been following a ton on Twitter recently. He writes a blog called 2 p.m.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Websmith. I mean, just the intersection of content and commerce and media and brands. WordPress and WooCommerce are just beautifully positioned to hit that intersection. Yeah,
and we sort of, I'm happy to go, this is what I talk about day in, day out. I'm happy to go down this road again, but I think, I think what is great about WordPress, what is great about WooCommerce is that they're open source, you own the code, but they're also fundamentally a user-friendly interface.
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
And where we see feedback from all competitors, not necessarily just Shopify or anybody else, is that it's really hard to beat the WordPress UI from a user experience standpoint.
Yeah.
Meaning most people have used WordPress, given its longevity as a tool.
Yep.
It is a fundamentally easy concept to understand, posts and pages, although, that can be made very complex and bespoke based on custom post types, custom user roles.
Yeah.
And it's just not hard, right? There's not a lot of cruft between the user and creating.
Yeah.
I think that's what I've always loved about WordPress. That's what I think our customers love about WordPress. And I think that's frankly what's powered WordPress from that small, scrappy blog CMS that I evaluated at theatlantic.com to 41% of content management systems on the web or sites on the web where the content management system is known.
Yeah.
That scale, right, like from 41% is orders of magnitude bigger than any other content management system, including Shopify. I think it's the site w3text.com is where we get that market share data from.
Yeah, I mean the community around WordPress is just mind blowing. I've got some friends that run. I think you may know this. A couple good buddies of mine run Font Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
And something crazy like 70% of the sites that Font Awesome is on is. And I don't know if that's a stat that I can quote or not, but a lot of the sites.
I gotcha.
Are WordPress.
It's not uncommon. I mean, I think. Again, what's mind-blowing for me from someone who stumbled into a web product management gig when he was far too young and far too experienced, thank you to the people who took the chance on me at theatlantic.com to now, right? I was able to sort of see over the last 14, 15 odd years, the progression of, and the way it was talked about. Oh, it's great, it's promising, people love it, but it's not ready for the enterprise. To now, right, VIP, and I'm skipping way far ahead.
Yeah.
VIP was started as a vision of Automattic to prove that WordPress could be run in a high-scale, high-security way. And
was there criticism from the community about that?
Yeah, well, so it was started in 2006. Okay. Automattic was founded in 2005, if I'm not mistaken. WordPress, the open source software framework, and the project around WordPress was 2003.
Okay.
So WordPress got its start in 2003. Automattic, VIP's parent company, was started in 2005. VIP was started as a division of Automattic in 2006. And its earliest customers were quite literally VIPs. Kara Swisher and Walt Mossberg at All Things D. Robert Scoble, if you remember Robert Scoble, Scobleizer. A couple other famous bloggers of that era wanted to use WordPress, had large audiences, and wanted Automattic's help and Matt's help to prove that this could be run at a high scale. So VIP was a program to invite those people to
Very interesting.
WordPress.com and lend engineering support to ensure that their sites could scale.
Interesting.
And ensure that we could prove that WordPress could do these things. Very long story short, that begat intros to larger media companies that wanted to experiment using WordPress and using WordPress for their core domains. And then as content became central to marketing and central to the need to produce content, the need to have content to power the growth of these, any marketing initiative, we've really seen huge inbound interest from staid Fortune 1000 companies. We were talking about Salesforce before the camera is on. And that's certainly one. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? There's a lot of companies out there that look at their current content management systems, who are all great, right? Like, and brief aside, as someone who had to solve a lot of problems with the tools they had in front of them and not the tools that they wanted, if it's working, I'm the first to say, don't mess with success. Yeah, sure. And yet there's a lot of people who look at the tools in front of them and say, this isn't working, right? Yeah. Like, we've got to get, our KPIs online and our digital presences to this level, and to do that, we need content. We know that. Yeah. How do we increase the throughput here? How do we get faster to market? How do we
decrease the technical barrier too? I mean, you can't produce content at scale when you have to have, I love developers. They're great, smart engineers, but you can't, a developer shouldn't have to push the button on a piece of content.
Yep. And so exactly. And so WordPress right now, especially, is this great marriage of a UI that is low or no code when done well, right? A non-technical user can sit down in front of it and basically just create content. Yep. And And yet, because it's open source, because the code is owned by the customers that control it, and because there are partners like VIP in the ecosystem that lead the enterprise ecosystem, we can advise our enterprise customers on the secure and performant ways to code against WordPress, how you can customize it so that it works and can meet an enterprise security standard, but doesn't dilute that sort of ease of use. And frankly, VIP in its editorial experience has been working with newsrooms like the New York Post
that case study was really interesting.
Right. The hundreds of journalists in a given day publishing articles, and customized WordPress in a way that really makes it efficient for a social media editor to touch the social aspects of content without needing to get into the overall approach. And that approach from translates from a media context to a marketing context.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. That's what stakeholders, customers in the Fortune 500 want to learn from. And I think you see that everywhere, right? Like that's not just in our business, that's in marketing, that's in advertising.
Sure.
But that agility, that simplicity and flexibility is what keeps our customers happy. I went into a pitch.
I love it. I wanted to hear about it because I'm admittedly not super educated on what WordPress VIP is about, and it's starting to come together. I actually was really interested in your agency program. I want to talk to you about that. I'm curious, backing up a little, so how did how'd you land in the nonprofit scene?
So the answer was I'd spent 4 years at the Atlantic and had an amazing set of jobs. Still, some of my best friends to this day are people I met at the Atlantic. Groomsmen in my wedding. Talk to him once a month.
Nice.
And yet I just had a really intense 4 years, and I had my girlfriend at the time, now wife, who I wanted to get engaged to and get married to.
Did you guys meet in Boston, or is she from Kansas as well?
DC. So she's from Nebraska. She grew up just north of Omaha. Met and married while we were in DC, but I needed to get off this sort of 60, 70 hour a week high stress job treadmill and needed to focus on landing that plane, so to speak. And so had learned about the Pew Charitable Trust, large institutional nonprofit, an endowed foundation, and they were hiring for digital strategy roles. They wanted to get hip. They wanted to start focusing on content. They wanted to start doing all the things we just discussed. It was a 9-to-5 job where I felt like I could add some value. Fantastic organization, does great nonpartisan research, and had a great time there. And yet it was my first exposure so in media, you rip and run. In media, you work with the tools that you have in front of you, and the idea that you need to publish quickly is taken for granted, right? And so you're looking almost like with ruthless efficiency, how do I make this easiest to get content through the system? In a big foundation like that, when I was working on the communications team, it's less about throughput, more about quantity or quality. And so it was just a sea change. And then I sat down and looked at their .NET CMS, Ectron. I don't know if anybody has used Ectron.
Hashtag Ftron for the
Ectron. It sounds like Ghostbusters. It's still around. It's now owned by a company. It's actually Episerver, which just bought Optimizely and rebranded to Optimizely, owns Ectron.
Interesting.
But .NET CMS got a lot of traction in the enterprise, and I looked at it, and I was looking at a tool that was fundamentally unfriendly for creating content, right? And I was supporting the people around the foundation that were putting content into the content management system. And so I was like, this is my first brush and kind of first aha moment with, wow, this is a tool that is a content management system, but bears no resemblance to the tools that I was just supporting, journalists and bloggers and, amazing writers and content producers at the Atlantic. And I was like, why is this so bad? And again, I have no truck against Ectron. I'm sure it works incredibly well. But if the idea is we need to produce more content, right, be a digital content strategist, which is what I was hired to do, I was like, this isn't
going to get me there.
Yeah, this is going to get me where. So it's a shaggy dog story, but suffice to say, we kicked off a process that eventually replaced that system. By then, I had gotten married, and jumped to the PBS NewsHour, which was owned and operated by a Kansan, Jim Lara. And my parents had grown up every night with the NewsHour on while they made dinner. And so I grew up a NewsHour viewer. It was like the other sort of tentpole media property that I was like, yeah, I definitely want to work there.
So it's safe to say that you're an old school like journalism guy.
My little sister likes to say I'm born 40. So like she likes to say at 2 years old, I was like reading The Atlantic and like talking to my dad about the stock market.
That's great.
She's probably not wrong. That would make me 78, and I think my wife would probably agree that I'm 78.
That's funny.
In some way, shape, or form. So yeah, my media tastes. I did listen to hip hop, and I was sad when DMX passed away recently because that was big in my high school days. But notwithstanding those like late 90s touch points, I was definitely always a nerd. Definitely always an old soul. And so I was excited about working at the NewsHour.
Yeah.
And Jim Lara and his partner, Robin McNeil, started the production company that owned the NewsHour. PBS is a system where often the producers own the shows and they sell them into the system. Not many people know that.
I had no idea.
Yeah. And so it was an independent production company that sold into the public television system.
So they run their own business and sell it to the
They did, yeah. And the business had changed, right? So huge. I mean, you do want to talk about amazing journalism. I would encourage anybody listening to this to watch 1 hour of the PBS NewsHour. You will walk away with like just amazing understanding. It is an incredible program. I'm so happy it exists and is thriving. And yet, when I worked there, the model for public television underwriting had changed. And Jim knew this. This was not news to Jim. But essentially what was able to be underwritten by advertisements, by essentially corporate sponsors, those people had shifted their money slowly but surely to digital and sort of higher performing ad areas. Again, not news to you.
Yeah.
And the show was largely funded by institutional nonprofits, endowed foundations, but it wasn't enough to cover the gap.
Okay.
And Jim was getting older. He's since passed away, and he was a great, great guy. I learned a lot from working for him. But he had hired a team of people, and I was the lowest rung on that totem pole, to stabilize the show so that it could find a new ownership, right? Essentially, he could sell it before a life event happened for him that would make it hard for him to run. And it was really in the best interest of the NewsHour. A very long story short,
that's incredible.
I did a lot of general business stuff, some of which was digital, but a lot of which was, just helping stabilize the finances of the program and getting everything lined out so that it could be sold to the local public television station, which in DC is WVTA. And when that transaction happened, it was summer of 2014. My wife and I were like, we're not getting any younger, and we're going to start a family. So let's get closer to our families when that happens. We moved to Kansas City.
I'm embarrassed to admit that I went to KU. I'm a journalism grad. I worked at the Kansan. First job was a newspaper, and I had no idea Jim Lara was a Kansan.
Yeah, so he was born in Texas but raised in Wichita and identifies as Kansan. I think he identified as both, depending on who he was speaking to.
Very interesting.
Jim would write books in Wichita, Kansas. He wrote like 20 books, and his mom was from Wichita, so he spent a lot of time in Wichita growing up, and he inherited his mom's house. I think kept it. But he would tell me he would love going back to Wichita because he was famous, right, on the news every night. And it was one of the only places you could go in America where people would recognize him on the street and like basically nod at him and not talk to him. And he loved that about
That's
Wichita.
awesome.
He was just sort of accepted and allowed to be whoever he was.
What an experience working for a guy like that. That's so cool.
Yeah, he's a legend for a reason. The best story I have from that era is a story about Jim Lehrer had hired Bo Jones Jr., who was the former publisher of the Washington Post.
Okay.
Bo Jones Jr. hired my friend and boss at the NewsHour, Mike Rancilio, who's still the business head of the NewsHour. And Bo Jones had overlapped with Ben Bradlee, the famous editor of the Washington Post during the Watergate scandal. So working in newsrooms and around newsrooms in D.C., and with the name Ben Bradlee, everybody would start every conversation with, hey, do you know? Because, I'm a young guy. But remember, I was born 40. So I was like, of course I knew. I watched like All the President's Men, which has Jason Robards as the character of Ben Bradlee, when I was like 8 years old.
That's hilarious.
And so my line before I met him was, the real Ben Bradlee, as I like to call him, was, oh, I haven't met him, but I need to thank him because I get better dinner reservations in DC. And people would kind of politely chuckle, and we'd move on. But when I went to the NewsHour, Jim Lehrer was friends with the real Ben Bradlee, and Bo Jones had worked with and for the real Ben Bradlee. And he was, at the end of his long life, he was, a little bit elderly and feeble. But is it okay to curse on this podcast?
Of course, we encourage it.
Actually, I will. I'll keep it clean for my 3.5-year-old. But the real Ben Bradlee was famously profane, and they bring him to the studios one day for lunch. This is Jim Lehrer and Bo Jones Jr. And they're like, you got to meet him. You got to meet him, right? Like, of course, these guys who are friends with him are like, you got to meet the real Ben Bradlee. I'm walking to lunch, and the restaurant that they're at, they start tapping on the glass windows. They're like, he's in here. And they bring me in. I had an iPhone. I didn't take a selfie. I'm a bad millennial. But he's sitting there, and they're like, Ben Bradlee, meet Ben Bradlee. And he says, how's that name working out for you? And I was like, pretty well. He's like, you're effing right. but the real F-bomb. And I was like, this is amazing. I was like, this is the best story. The best gift that he could have given me is that story. That's about as good as it gets. Man. I know. And so, he that was probably the single best story I have of a slew of really great stories coming out of the NewsHour.
That is freaking awesome.
But, nice. So get to the end of that corporate transition where Jim had found a new owner for the NewsHour. They hired a new executive producer. Gwen Ifill and Judy Woodruff were named anchors. And really, the program transformed from a program where there was a lot of anchors to Gwen and Judy, who are amazing journalists, with Sarah Just as the new executive producer, and Mike leading the business. It really took off. Huh. I could have stayed. I would have been happy to stay. It's an amazing program, but we wanted to get closer to home. We moved to Kansas City. I networked my way around, and through Pew contacts, I met people at the Kauffman Foundation.
Nice.
And the Kauffman Foundation were like, you seem good. You've worked in nonprofits, and nonprofits of our type. And we've got some digital products we might need help with eventually. Yeah. One of which was Kauffman Fast Track.
Yeah, right.
And so I was hired on as a senior program officer to do a variety of things. Nice. Generalist is kind of my job description. Yeah. And one of those things was Kauffman Fast Track, where the team that I worked with really focused on taking what was a paper textbook and making it into a digital course. Yep. And that's a classic web product management story, but like with just like an awesome purpose. Yeah. Which, I mean, in the foundation itself, Mr. Kauffman, what he meant to Kansas City. I'm actually looking at a poster of the Royals winning the World Series, which happened the second year, the first year.
You were at Kauffman Foundation during this.
Yes, that was the first year I was back, and like. Again, it just felt like every day you walk into the Kauffman Foundation, you walk past the Ewing Marion Kauffman statue with Muriel McBride Kauffman, and like the Royals in the World Series, and it's like my hair's standing up on my shoulders like right now. It's like, it was incredible.
Well, I have to say, we're super proud to have that logo on our website. Oh yeah. I mean, that was a big deal for us.
A passion project for everybody who's involved. And, entrepreneurs learn on the job. Entrepreneurs are the ultimate, figure it out people, right? Like, it's kind of weird developing educational materials for them, but our goal with Fast Track was to make it accessible, to make sure that it was, the content was always great, but make it really available to them in a format they could get when they needed it. And so it was a great project, happy to do it. Got to the end of that project and again was like, had the option to stay, there was great leadership and it's like an amazing place with a lot of great projects. But throughout my career, I'd always been the guy saying, why not WordPress? We had Fast Track, I think, still has a WordPress site fronting the actual course. And Kaufman now uses WordPress. And I'd seen Ectron, right? I'd seen some suboptimal content management systems. And I was looking to get back into the for-profit sector. And I'd remembered that Automattic was a fully distributed company. We were talking about this before the camera was on, but and I'm going to mess up this story. I apologize to Matt. But when Matt was starting Automattic, the employees he wanted to hire were globally distributed. And so, one option would have been to move them to San Francisco where he was at the time, get venture funding, get a building, right? Do the
Silicon Valley thing.
Exactly. Right? But if you know anything about Matt, this probably came across in your speech. He's so thoughtful and so oriented towards first principles and sort of how he wanted the company to run. And he's spoken eloquently about it since, but his big idea is, talent is evenly distributed around the world. Opportunity is not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring a Silicon Valley job to these employees that I'm going to hire anywhere in the world, right? Pay them what they're worth in this market and build the company around the idea that we do not need to be physically present in order to do this very good and important work.
I love it. I mean, this is pre-pandemic too, right?
Well, this was 2005.
Ago,
this was like, I hadn't even been hired at theatlantic.com. It was such a visionary idea. And he has been such an evangelist of distributed work. Pandemic, you want to talk about the pandemic. I feel like Matt was the hottest interview for every corporate CEO and board coming out of the pandemic. But he's super articulate about it. Actually, on his blog, and I'll send you this link, there's an idea that animates distributed work and how he thinks about it. It's the levels of distributed work. It's like 5 levels. It's a pyramid.
I'd love to read that.
But it's animated by this idea of autonomy. It's how much do you trust your employees to work when you're not looking at them. So the idea of an office, and I'm sure there's a high trust environment. I can tell that just walking around the building. But the idea of an office is almost predicated on the idea of like a manufacturing line or like, you got to punch in, punch out.
You can't see what's going on. And then people live in fear of am I wasting money? Are people not working? And
distributed work works best when you can trust that employees are going to be granted the autonomy, but also be held accountable to the results they generate. And I think that's what's amazing about Automattic. It's such a transparent, autonomous culture. And essentially flat, even though now we're 1,600 people. Automattic bought Tumblr.com, of course operates WordPress.com, VIP, WooCommerce, Jetpack, a variety of other just really category defining internet products.
What I've always found interesting about the remote work thing is that once you understand how open source software works, then the remote work thing gets so much easier to understand. Like my world completely got turned upside down in 2009 when 2 developers introduced me to Git. And they were like, this is how open source code control works. You can check stuff in, you can make comments, you can branch. And it's like, well, and I don't know. This is awesome.
Matt's on the board of GitLab, another huge distributed company that of course supports Git. But I don't know if you've seen GitLab has put their entire corporate documentation online in a GitLab repository. So I work in sales. You can go and read their sales playbook, their compensation structure, the expectations for everything. And again, if you get open source or work around open source folks, makes complete sense, right?
100%.
Matt, of course, super passionate about open source. We are super passionate about open source, the open web at Automattic. Once you really grapple with the implications of what those ideas mean, right? It's almost impossible to ignore. I'm speaking like it's my company. I think all automaticians, as we call ourselves, feel a sense of ownership and pride of working there. But Matt's the visionary the company itself was really animated by the principles behind the open source WordPress project. And it's amazing. I mean,
So
it's really hard to articulate other than like using woo-woo words, because like to see it work and to see how people can, be on the other side of the globe from each other, but still like ship code at a really amazing level, work
How many
together.
people work there?
1,600. VIP is now approaching 200. We'll be past 200 by the end of
So
this
how's a 1,600 person company do? Like, I mean, do you guys use Slack? Do you have a big company Slack room? Is there like?
Yeah. So yes, we've got Slack, and we like Slack. Before Slack, it was Skype, and before Skype, it was IRC.
IRC, yeah.
And we still default to IRC when Slack is down.
Man, I love IRC. I'll never forget. I worked for Scott Lynn at Ad Knowledge when it was Virtuamundo, like in 2001. It was my first job in space.
Yep.
And I mean, I'll never forget. I was 24, I think, when I took that job there, and I think he was 19.
Yeah.
And he was like, "Oh, the first thing you need to do is download IRC." And I was like, "I need to what?" I put IRC on my computer, and there was like a freaking 75 people in this chat room. And I'm like, "This is insane."
I still have IRC on my MacBook because we boot it up when Slack's down, so that like the company can keep running. Shout out to IRC. I think like
Colloquy. Is that the app that's used for?
Textual.
Textual.
Yeah, all of them are good. IRC clients. I think. That old school internet, like I have such nostalgia about some of that stuff. IRC, I mean, there's still a lot of people who do IRC. But yeah, since the jump is the point, we've had a mode of synchronous communication. But the asynchronous communication is actually done in WordPress.
Really?
So there's a theme for WordPress called P2, like letter P, number 2. And you can actually get your own P2 on WordPress.com. It is a theme, but it's a theme that allows you to essentially write on WordPress from the front end of a WordPress site, WordPress.com.
Very interesting.
And so each team, each division, each subgroup or project will have its own P2. And we essentially think of email and the function that email serves in most companies vis-a-vis Slack. So Slack is, I need something now. Email's like, we're communicating with the outside world, or there's a project that is like a slower burn. Yeah. All of that internal communications happens on P2.
Very interesting.
The only time I email with my colleagues is ironic jokes about how we're emailing each other. We do email with the outside world, right? So
it's really interesting.
But like,
I wrote a blog post on my Medium blog, which I don't maintain anymore, but it was all about sort of how we think about communication at the agency, and different. Should this be a Slack? Should this be an email? Should this be in? We use Asana for project management. But so P2 it sounds like more sort of like an internal wiki style, Basecampy sort of.
That's exactly right. Basecamp, Wiki are good analogies. It's just rooted in WordPress. I think it's particularly powerful if you know how to use WordPress, because it's got all the things you know and familiar about. And I think we've got a product team actually right now really working on iterating on P2, making it sort of integrate with the other systems that particular functions would use. I'm really excited for that work. Not a lot of that work is in production yet, but
so in a 1,600 person organization, I'm really curious to dive into this topic of asynchronous communication. I don't think a lot of organizations think about that as much as they should. I mean, there's a lot of organizations, ours included, where that's, I think, something we need to get better at. Like we default to Slack. Right. If you need something, throw it in Slack. And I love Slack, and I am probably the one person that uses Slack the most, and I probably shouldn't. Like I value long form, thoughtful communication, and I think that's something that's really missing in our world today.
Yeah, well, and I think like you hit the nail on the head. We use a lot of Slack too. I probably default to Slack too much, especially now that I'm a new team lead and I'm communicating with my team all the time. That's happening in Slack. Now, recently, as of last week, I've made in my reflection time about how I'm doing work, I need a P2 more for precisely that reason. To summarize a Slack conversation, to summarize progress on a deal in our instance, or something that would be customer facing, takes a moment's worth of thought. Takes the idea that you need to compose this so that literally anybody in the company can read it, because anybody in the company could, right? And it's an open email thread. And the interaction, by the way, that happens from that when anybody in a 1,600 person organization can drop in and see what a team is working on, what's progressing in a different type of a company. It leads to this. It's really amazing collaboration, right? Because you don't know in a 160 person organization, much less a 1,600 person organization, who knows what about what topic, right? So if you're taking time to summarize, describe, and keep track of a work stream in a way that's transparent and open to everybody in the company, amazing things will happen, right? Somebody will raise their hand and say, "Oh, you're working with that framework. At my last job, I did like XYZ. Let me see what you're working with and help you along." Oh, you're working with this customer. Turns out I came out of that engineering organization. I can tell you everything about sort of how that shop operates. And so you share knowledge and it's there, right? So think about WordPress relative to the open web. WordPress is SEO friendly, indexable, easy to search, discoverable. And the same is true for P2 conversations for the history of Automattic. There's P2s going back all the way to 2005. And so sweet. You've got like, real preserved like work stream history for like everything in the company. Now, I don't know that if I sat down today, I could read everything. But we've got great search tools internally. We've got great discoverability features, and you get notified if somebody mentions you on a P2, and that brings me back.
That's interesting. One thing I thought was fascinating about Basecamp, I follow those guys pretty closely, and they at one point, I don't know if they still do this, but they had a Jason Fried had like a 24-hour rule that they implemented, where if you wrote a long form piece of communication in Basecamp, that you had to wait 24 hours to respond to it, and it would force. With Slack, the tendency is to reply super quickly,
right? Yeah.
Like I got to get this thought out of my head, and then the immediacy to respond is so great that you don't take the time to sit down and digest what the person is thinking.
And yes, that's exactly right. I mean, I wouldn't say that there's a formal, we would call it an SLA, right? Like, because we work in that space. There's not a formal SLA on like when you need to respond and how you need to respond, but it's up to each individual person. And yet, I think walking away and thinking about, the response, especially when it's a hard subject, and those are, litigated in P2s as well. Litigated is the wrong word. You can tell I'm a son of a lawyer. Those are discussed in P2 too. I think, giving it room to breathe, right? Like letting your first reaction marinate. And we have this phrase internally, assume positive intent. And the reason we assume positive intent is because so much of our communication, especially with colleagues who are in another time zone, who I'll never have asynchronous communication with. Written communication is so powerful, right? Because you can compose it, but it also lacks what we have in this room, right?
Context.
I can't see your eyes. I can't read the room. And so sometimes words can come across as aggressive or short or be misinterpreted. And so it only works if you assume positive intent. So and I forget to do that sometimes. Everybody does. It's just human. And
it marinates over time. Like the more you work with an organization and the more trust that builds up and the more collaboration that happens. Like the guys at Found Awesome have an amazing workflow. I mean, super thoughtful, very long form. Like they work in cycles and they do product pitches and they discuss at length the why behind what they're building. It's just fascinating to watch a team work like that.
And all of my jobs have been awesome. Like I don't mean to suggest that they're all awesome for different reasons, but like Automattic has been the most mind-blowing experience.
I'll be sending you my resume.
We are hiring. It must be said, WPVIP.com/careers or Automattic.com/careers. Right. We are hiring like crazy. We are growing very rapidly as a company, but the most mind-blowing thing is the culture, right? The culture that's created from that level of transparency, that level of autonomy, and that level of just trust in any individual employee. I was talking about this with a colleague today. So normal company, you tell your boss when you're going to be out of the office anytime. And I've got a lot of new people on my team, and they're all great. And some of them have taken to telling me, like, I told my boss when I was hired there, hey, I'm going to go to a dentist appointment for the next hour, but don't worry, I'll be back really quickly. And the answer is always okay. But the answer eventually is always like, you don't need to tell me that. Like, I don't actually care. And I'm happy you're taking care of your dental health. A longtime colleague of mine took the morning off to go to her daughter's kindergarten graduation. You have the flexibility to fit the work into your schedule, and there's nobody literally minding the clock. Like, you're not punching in and punching out. And that plus the way we work is like a certain kind of magic that is, and what we work on, right? WordPress, work with the open source community that supports WordPress. It's not just Automattic. And the sort of flywheel of humans around the world from different backgrounds contributing to an end result in various sorts of ways is just so cool.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Like, it's really, I sound, like metaphysical, or like the double rainbow guy. Again, that dates me, right? It's like, it's so awesome. It's so awesome. A double rainbow.
We just had one. I was just talking to my kids about this.
I know.
We saw one, and I was like, you'll never believe this, video from 15 years ago.
Right, yeah. It's, again, the early YouTube, right? Yeah. Yeah.
So who does... man, I could sit here and talk to you all day long.
Sure.
I know we're running up against time, but I got a couple other questions to ask you. This is maybe a little broad one, but
sure.
who does WordPress VIP compete with? I mean, is it? What else is out there?
Yeah. So the answer is everyone, and I, of course, being a sales lead, I'm going to say no one.
Yeah.
But I think the honest answer is it depends. It depends. What you're talking about and why you're coming to VIP.
Let me tell you the two customers that I see in that space. You tell me kind of where you see them fitting. HubSpot and Webflow are the two that jump out to me.
Yeah, and we certainly run across HubSpot and Webflow. If you're talking about content management on the web, if you're talking about anything where WordPress could be applicable, that's a broad set of use cases. And so, I've run up against Webflow. I certainly HubSpot, right? But more often, I describe our market in two chunks, right? There's the WordPress ecosystem where it's big, right? Yeah. And there's a lot of places you can put your WordPress site. You can self-host it on your own server in your closet, in your bedroom. It's open source. You own the code. You can put it on AWS, GCP, Azure. You can put it on a WordPress host, and that is a big category with a lot of
WP Engine, Flywheel.
Exactly. But even like GoDaddy, HostGator, there are tons of WordPress hosting companies in the world, and there are a lot of good options. So WordPress ecosystem is sort of one market where we compete. What differentiates us in that market is VIP is focused on the needs of enterprises. Yeah. We own and operate our own delivery infrastructure. So our servers globally are installed in data centers by our systems team and maintained. And that's really differentiated from the rest of the market. And then, of course, we are part of the company whose CEO is Matt Mullenweg. And VIP as a division has a history of sort of knowing what secure and performant code looks like. So we're sort of a pure player in the ecosystem in that we only work with high scale, high security enterprise customers. The other market that is much more common is what I would call content management systems, aside from WordPress, where they're coming to us because they want to know, how does WordPress fit in this context? And when you think about our customers, which are Fortune 1000 companies, which are high scale publishers, which are anybody who, we hosted the Biden transition website. We got FedRAMP authorized, meaning we were meeting the U.S. government's federal security standards. And
a lot of media companies, a lot of government organizations, a lot of nonprofits.
That's right. A lot of anybody with a brand to protect, and who's deriving a lot of value from their digital presences. They might be comparing WordPress to Adobe Experience Manager in the enterprise, or Sitecore, or they might be comparing WordPress to Contentful or Prismic or Sanity.io, right? And there are thousands of content management systems. So if you said picked 3 of them and said, do you compete with these people? I would say yes.
Yeah.
And
it's interesting.
And I think it's kind of obvious in how I've been talking, but it is both the power of the ecosystem, which of course we leverage for the benefit of our customers, and our expertise in this niche, which is high scale, high security, right? Like if you want to know the right way to do something, and you want to have a platform that's architected for the needs of an enterprise, and you want to move faster, right? So there's nothing that we do that is completely proprietary. You couldn't do it yourself. And yet, like, we get you further faster because we're a platform architected to do, auto scaling, containerization with a security architecture that's passing FedRAMP standards. And we've got expert developer support that can help your developers, agency or in-house, think through what the secure and performant way to do something in WordPress is. And increasingly, that's not just WordPress powering the front end of websites, but that's WordPress and WooCommerce for a Fortune 500 who wants to experiment with a DTC strategy or have that content and commerce experience in the same screen. It is headless or hybrid implementations of WordPress where you're using the REST API or WP GraphQL as an API endpoint to feed a JavaScript framework on the front end, which we can host on our infrastructure. So you can
run it with, say, React or any of the new hotness out there. A
lot of our customers do. One of my customers, AccuWeather.com, AccuWeather.com is a Vue.js front end that's hosted on Azure. And it joins a lot of data, right? It's AccuWeather, right? Weather data. There's a lot going on at that Vue.js level. And yet all of the content for AccuWeather.com comes from VIP, off VIP servers. And everybody producing content for AccuWeather.com on their website, on their mobile app, any AccuWeather presence, right? And they've got a ton of them, is putting that content in via WordPress on WP VIP.
What about banks and financial institutions? You got that?
Yes.
Site covered? Okay.
Many of whom I cannot tell you about, but any regulated, highly regulated industry who is attracted to the simplicity, the flexibility, the agility of WordPress, but needs expert developer support, needs the security that we can provide. I mean, I talked about the Biden transition site, buildbackbetter.gov, but that's a good example of someone who is a target, right? The president-elect of the United States, right? They launch on WordPress. Like, if there's a vulnerability there, there's going to be hell to pay.
Very interesting.
And so we're the platform, we're the team that helps their team with a lot of other people. It's not solely us, but we're part of the equation that helps them get to that, great brand presence to protect the president-elect's brand and to keep that site secure.
That's fascinating, man. Dude, I have thoroughly enjoyed this discussion.
Me too.
I would love to have you out again. I mean, this is I've been meaning to reach out to you.
Yeah, I'll happily, and I've got colleagues too. I don't know if you do these remote, but I got great colleagues that can talk as well. I'm paid for talking, although I have done some doing in my career, and I happily would invite any of those. I'm honored to be here. Really appreciate what you all are doing, and happy to tell my story. And I really appreciate the invitation.
Let me wrap with 3 questions. So this is a rapid fire. Yeah. Answer them quick. Okay, so we go to a bar after work. What are you ordering?
A beer, although, again, befitting my 78 years on this planet, I've recently gone low carb, so I'd probably maybe go whiskey now or bourbon. Okay. But honestly, any beer. I'm a sucker for beer, and I'm a sucker for bars. My big question is what bar? Are we talking fancy bar? Are we talking dive bar?
So that's a great question. That's the right answer.
Because I love dive bars. Oh, dude, love dive bars.
Okay, so what's your favorite dive bar in Kansas City?
High Dive, Peanut, or Pantheon, obviously. Love it. And then there's this one. I'm gonna blank on the name, but there's one on Main Street, I think, in Midtown. That a colleague from Kaufman took me there. It's like a hole in the wall.
Frickin' Frack?
It might be that. I have to check. I'm gonna email this guy.
Those are my clients from the radio days. Frickin' Frack.
Well, it was just like smoky, dingy room. Looks like a Baltimore neighborhood bar. If anybody knows what that looks like. Looks
so
like
awesome.
The guy who is the bartender lives upstairs, and like I was like, this is my heaven. Like I need to remember this place, and clearly I
Dude,
did.
there's nothing better than a good dive bar.
Oh my
I mean,
God.
there's a place in Lawrence called the Jet Lag Lounge that
Yeah.
was just like the most amazing place. I don't even know if it's still around anymore.
I think I was there very briefly
Oh,
late
I
at
love
night.
it. So good. There's a place. I don't know if I would classify this as a dive bar. And one of my favorite bars in Kansas City is a place called the Ship.
Oh yes, Ship. My wife and I have listened to live music of the Ship. We love the Ship. Same reason.
Love that place.
Like, don't get me wrong. I like high-end cocktail bars. I
Yeah.
like curated drink experiences. But if we're going to a bar after work, I'm going to want to go to a dive bar.
Yeah.
I'm going to want to like revel in the fact that
and
like
order a hams and drink it out of a can. You know,
the High Dive, the mystery beer machine. I love that. Like,
that's awesome.
it's a true story. The CEO of VIP came to Kansas City for a pitch that we were working on. And I took him to Joe's. Q39 the first night, Joe's the second night, and High Dive.
Nice.
And we both got mystery beers out of the mystery beer machine.
That is awesome.
He was impressed.
That is hilarious. All right. Well, next time we'll go out, we'll do one of these at every dive bar.
For sure.
Okay. Crypto, future or fake news?
Oh man, that's such a hard question. So I would say both,
Okay.
because, and that's a bit of a cop out, but look, I think the technology is realer than Santa Claus. That's a joke. I think the technology is legit, right?
Yeah.
Like obviously there's something to there. The blockchain, like distributed ledger, I think makes a ton of sense.
Yep.
And yet we know, because we work in technology and because we've been around for a while, there are hype cycles, there are fads, there are times when things aren't ready. I fully believe that crypto is going to be around, when my kids are my age.
Yeah, I agree.
But like, it's hard for me to say that like, anything in the market right now is like worth the valuation that it has.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I am not super close to it. Because I have a 3.5-year-old and a 15-month-old. So I'm essentially a dad at this point, and you shouldn't believe anything I say on these topics.
All right. So one thing you learned about yourself during the pandemic.
That's a good question. So the pandemic, as I was explaining before the cameras were rolling, was my 15-month-old was born the month before the pandemic became real. So it's hard to disaggregate pandemic from second child in my mind. But I think like I'll sound like a Hallmark cliche, and Hallmark cliches are cool because we're in Kansas City.
Yeah, another Casey company. Yeah,
that's exactly. But like, I was traveling a lot for work before the pandemic. This is a demanding job in the best possible way. And I think the combination of the pandemic coming on and me getting off the road and then realizing that I wouldn't be on the road for a long time and like focusing on family, focusing on the neighborhood, focusing on, like the things that you would take for granted. I mean, like it was hard and like it was hard for everybody, but like, the opportunity to focus, right? Is I mean, you were talking about with writing it's so rare. It's so rare in my day. And just like the reminder that like, hey, you're in a place, that place can support you, is a neighborhood with like people. I mean, we're super close with our neighbors now.
Yeah, we are too.
We weren't close with our neighbors before.
Yeah.
I mean, we knew a couple of them, but like, there's just a different vibe. And like, I mean, life will change. Life goes on. Everybody gets busy, but like the opportunity to be grounded in one place. Yeah,
that's good.
Was something I'm thankful for.
That's good. Well, good insights. As always, I was really, really pleased that you were able to come on. Ben Bradley, WordPress, Automattic. Thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Appreciate
and I really appreciate what y'all are doing here. Happy to talk about the agency partner programs. Thank you all. And again, thanks for the invitation.
Awesome. Thanks, dude.
Yeah.